Hello, Kaptein. Lurkers. I don't get this unit. I already knew they are broken in mid and late game, destroying everything in their path. They're just better siege tanks, in every way. They don't only massive AoE damage, but Blizzard felt the need to give them the ability to be mass-produced, being invisible, and being able to siege a lot faster than siege tanks. Why? But after this game, I'm also convinced that they're broken in the early game as well. I scouted he wanted to 2-base all-in me with Hydras. I stopped worker production, built defensive infrastructure, and built a ton of gates. But as soon as his first push with full upgraded Hydras, doesn't seem to cost him anything, was somewhat held, his next push with some lurkers came my way. I mean, why not? I would have done the same, if my units, upgrades and tech wouldn't cost anything. We'll be happy to see you agreeing with me on this one. Name, TOS OBV OP, Race, Protoss, League Master, 5.1k MMR on EU. So it's actually very close to Grandmaster. And the question here is, are Hydras and Lurkers imbalanced? Or does TOS OBV OP suck? Alright friends, here we are in the game. Hacker is noob versus TOS OBV OP. Good luck, have fun, good luck, have fun. Zerg, thank you. So Hacker is noob seems to have been a random player here. That is opening up with a pretty standard opener so far. An Overlord at 13. Nothing too weird. This is a master level game and this is a high level masters game. This is literally on the edge to Grandmaster. I think 5.2, 5.3 is Grandmaster in Europe. This is 5.1k MMR. So okay, this guy's in clan or in team cannon. And his name is TOS OBV OP. The opponent is called Hacker is Noob and is a random player. So this is going to be a banger no matter what happens. Even gets a block off here on the natural. Very cool. I like that type of play. Usually the more chaos you can induce in the early game, the better it is for Protoss. This is true majority of the time. Because then you can shade in 2 adepts, you can send over some oracles to deal damage, all that good jazz. All right, just gonna go upstairs at the 1 minute mark to to harass the minerals a little bit. Not a huge fan of a pylon. It is overly safe and 99% of the time it just costs money. If you see the drone go towards the third base, you can pretty much assume at the 1 minute and 5 second mark that it's not going to go back to build a base over here. So building a pylon there just costs you 25 minerals. I'm just not a huge fan of it. You're also mining too little gas. Whenever your gas finishes in this matchup, you always want to have 2 workers in gas immediately. Even if that means you'll have slightly less workers on the minerals. That is fine. This is, of course, as long as you're playing Stargate, which I kind of hope that you're doing, because this is 2k atmosphere. There's no other build orders that I really like on this map. It's relatively large and... well, that's really the only reason. It's relatively large and has nice areas for oracles as well. You can do a fair amount. Hatchery on the third base is going to finish up. Now, because this is a higher level game, I'm going to be paying a lot more attention to the kind of the nitty gritty details that maybe in some other episodes, if we were looking at a platinum player, I would skip. So I'm really curious about like all these small things, like are the chrono boost in time? What are we seeing unit wise? Okay, we're getting an adept and a warp gate. This indicates Stargate majority of the time. Ooh, and we have this being readied over here. So kind of feeling a robotics facility. Oh, it's going to be a cancel on the warp gate. So tries to fake a warp gate in case there's an overlord over here. Now, of course, there's an overlord in the main base already, so this was completely useless. I still kind of like it. At the same time, getting the Stargate on the edge exposes the Stargate to scouting, but it also means that the Oracle is going to arrive at your opponent's base 2-3 seconds faster if you compare it to the position over here. So this is a trade-off, it's a decision, and this is a decision that a lot of people at the higher level, they're fine with this decision, and I'm fine with this decision as well. It's not necessarily optimal if your plan is to hide things, but if you don't care about hiding things, this is a completely okay position to put your Stargate. It's probably even the optimal position to put your Stargate because you're just closer to your opponent's base. If you take a third base or a fourth base over here, you have quick reinforcements there with the Oracle as well. Where are you sending your first Oracle? Seems to be towards the right side. Your chrono boosting. Your build order actually makes a lot of sense. Second gateway before your pylon. I'm not a huge fan of that, to be quite honest. Majority of the time I prefer seeing that pylon before the gateway, but it's a very minor detail that if you build everything in time shouldn't really matter. And as long as you don't get a third gateway unit, it really, really doesn't matter. The reason why I prefer the pylon is in case you're getting Ling flooded or something like that, you would not be capable of continuing worker production as well as building a third unit. You'd need to cut some workers so you don't get supply blocked. And getting a faster second gateway has no real purpose anyway. It's a slightly faster wall, but if you get the gateway after the pylon, it's still going to be fine. So it's a really, really minor error in a very niche scenario that would matter. And a niche scenario that we honestly never see either, or hardly ever see. Oracle's going to make its way across the map. Correct call. You want to get it over there. You already have a little, what would you call it? A little hole where you manage to put your adept in. You scout the fact that there is a Hydra list then. You see a lot of gas as well here. And you see a low queen count and a complete lack of spores at this point. Now, this is important. And I'm going to explain quickly why this is important. The moment you see a Zerg rush out to lair, throw down a Hydra then, and get quick extra extractors, if you see no spores, that means that your oracles can do more damage. And because it's a quick rush to lair, 99% of the time, really 99% of the time, there's going to be not more than 4 queens. And majority of the time, only 3 queens. Because it's going to be practically a 2-base all-in. You called it in your form already. This is a 2-base all-in, despite there being a third hatchery. But the third hatchery is just there for extra Ling and extra Hydra production. It just allows the Zerg to continuously produce. So you make the correct call. You see this and you know, hey, this is basically a 2-base all-in. But where is the weakness? Now, the weakness is in the fact that there is no defense against Oracle harass. There's no spores, and there's not enough queens to stop Oracles from going into a mineral line, even if there were a spore. So this first Oracle took a little bit of damage. It cast the revelation. I would have preferred seeing it take out 3-4 workers. Usually 3-4 workers isn't that big of a deal, but every time you take out a worker right now, it most likely is not going to be rebuilt, or it will take away a larva for a potential Ling or for a potential Hydra. So it will help a lot in the defense. The best defense isn't building stasis wards, it is actually killing drones. It forces your opponent to be more all-in and thus commit more to an initial attack and to commit faster to an attack as well. And at the same time, it makes the attack weaker. While if you use these units defensively for stasis, you have some temporary benefit, but it doesn't really help you in the long run. I also am not a huge fan, you mentioned it in your imbalance complaint form as well, of cutting workers. I think cutting workers to get some key infrastructure going is okay. And with key infrastructure, I would say 5, maybe even 6 gateways. But currently you're going up to 9 gateways. I think that is too many. And you're cutting workers altogether, which means that from this point on, eco-wise, you're going to be the same as your opponent. And you're also not teching into anything better. You're only on 3 gases, so you actually have, the gas is the teching resource. So you won't be capable of out-teching your opponent. So really what you're doing here is you're saying, okay, we have the same eco, we have the same tech, and you can still out-tech me by going into lurkers. I am not going anywhere else. I hope you attack into me as fast as possible and that I hold. That is the only thing right now that you're preparing for. You're not preparing for a long-term scenario where with more eco, where lower tech units can help, or for a higher tech scenario where even with a lower eco, just by having a disruptor out, you can perhaps fight a big Hydra force. You're not doing any of that. You're making relatively primitive, basic units off of very high infrastructure. And the reason why I don't like getting 9 gate is because you only have 43 workers as well here. If you were on 55 workers, even then I wouldn't really like it. I would say, hey, add some extra cannons over the gateways, because you can probably get very similar unit production and then get 2 to 3 extra cannons as well. Like 2 cannons over here, 1 cannon here, a couple of extra batteries as well would be huge to have. Cannons in general are fantastic to have. Another thing I'd like to just kind of draw your attention to is that there's still no spores in the main or in the natural. We're working with a queen per base, which means that had the oracles moved across the map, you would have been capable of killing, well, this queen and every single worker in the main base. And this would have been the only push that would have been capable of coming out of the Zerg. These would be the units. Now that is what, 8 Hydra lists and maybe 10 links or so. With any amount of gateway units, you would eventually be capable of holding this. But because you're not actually up in eco right now, the Zerg doesn't feel any pressure to truly commit into this position. It really doesn't. There's no pressure on this Zerg. The only pressure that the Zerg feels right now might be because No, the Zerg is actually somewhat aware of your conundrum, sees that you don't have an extra gas, sees that you're not mining any minerals here either. So the Zerg is completely aware and doesn't need to engage into this area with batteries and stasis wards. He might still do it, but that would make the Zerg a bit of an idiot. And I doubt Hacker is noob is a bit of an idiot. You know, he's just picking off what he can, not truly committing to a big attack into a position, because he knows he has a Lurker Den on the way, and once that Lurker Den finishes, that's when his time is to shine, right? So he actually just pulls back. And I really like that call. Right now, you should be thinking, hey, what is happening here? He's pulling back with Hydras. You know, what could be the follow-up? So you're going for a scout. I think that is a good call. But at this point, no matter what you scout, you can't really do anything anymore against the Lurker. It's not like you have a robotics facility ready anywhere. You don't have charge on the way. You can't get storm out immediately. Like, there's literally nothing you can do anymore at this point, except maybe try and stop these units from morphing. But fighting away from your batteries also, honestly, seems rather difficult. And I think what you said in your form, I actually want to grab your form here, because you said something here. As soon as his first push with full upgraded Hydras was somewhat held. Technically, you held the push because you didn't die, but your opponent also didn't fight you. This is like if you were to have dinner in the same restaurant as Mike Tyson, and after he finishes his dinner, you challenge him for a fight, and he knocks you out in one punch. You could then say, well, for the first 50 minutes of the fight, everything was going swimmingly for me. But what in reality happened was that both of you were just eating in the same restaurant, not really wanting to fight whatsoever. That only happened after. And it's the same here. Your opponent is not ready to fight yet. He had his dinner with the Hydras, now is morphing the Lurkers, and you just completely walked into his trap. Right now, you should be somewhat... Oh, you actually didn't even scout the Lurk then. You also still didn't deal any damage. So the longer the game goes, the worse it actually is going to get for you. Your opponent has superior tech. You still have the exact same eco. Despite you having a very nice infrastructure of gateways, having a lot of gateway units, some of them even without upgrades. As you have, what, like 13 Zealots without charge. It's not the greatest thing. Somewhat decent control, honestly, out of you as well. Like an okay-ish blink. Zealots are getting through. Okay, this is not good. You're going to lose every single Zealot. Get a revelation on these Lurkers. There's not that many Lurkers remaining, only 3. One of them is already very low. You could consider at this point, by the way, although it's a difficult call to make, is to say, hey, you kind of treat it like a tank push out of a Terran, right? Where you say, okay, I can't necessarily straight up engage into the tank marine ball, but what I can do is I can send like maybe 2 oracles and 4 or 5 stalkers over here and pick off all reinforcements while I am continuously building more and more units myself. And then even with very primitive units like gateway units, eventually, if you get like 2 more warpins, you should be capable of attacking into this. The only problem is that your opponent can move forward, maybe start taking out your eco. So there's some risk there, but it's still better to try something like this than to continuously engage into the same sieged up position. Because you mentioned it, the Lurker is basically a siege tank that is slightly better, especially if you try to blink into it, as you noticed just now. Charge about to finish up. You also are waiting for your charge to finish anyway, so you might as well take out all the reinforcements that are going to be joining up. Literally just 5-6 stalkers, both of the oracles over there in case there's too many links. You can activate the pulsar beam for half a second. It would have been fantastic. But now all of these links are going to be joining in. These 2 Hydras get to join as well. These 3 Hydras get to join, so it's like 15, maybe even, yeah, about between 10 and 15 supply extra would not have been here in this army that is now here. I'm not saying you would have necessarily won, but with +2 upgrades against 0-0 upgrades, I mean, anything really is possible. You're also not fighting too poor. It actually... I'm kind of impressed by the way you play. Like, your micro is quite good. The way you engage from 2 angles majority of the time. Your target fire is sometimes okay, sometimes it isn't. But given the situation that you place yourself in and the fights that you wanted to take, the actual fights honestly weren't so bad. But this is the funny thing when we get to the higher levels of StarCraft 2 is, and I've mentioned this before when I have like a high Masters player, low Grand Master player, you can't really get away anymore with just macroing well and having somewhat decent reactions. Certain strategies need pretty specific reactions or need you to do very specific things. In this case, it wasn't even that specific, just harassing with the oracles or getting 10 extra workers or tacking into a disruptor. all would have been fine options, like 3-4 different things you could have done. But you really do need to do them in order to beat it, because this is a tight builder out of your opponent. But this has very little to do with imbalanced. If you would give the exact same position to a Protoss that is 500-600 MMR higher than you were, that Protoss would have killed every single worker with 2, 3, or even with a single Oracle. This push would have hit with 7 or 8 Hydras and 10 Links, and that would have been it. That has nothing to do with the Hydra or the Lurker being imbalanced. Now, I'll give it to you. If your opponent gets to this position, where there's Lurkers in between your natural and your third base, you have inferior tech, and you have inferior eco, you're not cutting off reinforcement, and there's no pressure for your opponent to move forward, so there's a lot of requirements here. In that case, yeah, the Lurker is extremely strong, and you probably can't beat it anymore. But it doesn't make the Lurker imbalanced, because the Lurker has a lot of other issues that you didn't abuse whatsoever, and this timing attack specifically had lots of issues that you didn't abuse whatsoever. It's like you look at one thing and you go, well, you only look at the advantages of a thing. It's basically, you look at like a massive gold bar, and you're like, I like a gold bar. I want my house to be made of gold bars. It looks pretty. It shines. It's pretty hard to get through with like a drill. I want my house to be built with pure gold. And then you don't think about the disadvantages whatsoever. Like gold, pretty expensive. I'm not entirely sure how easy it is to actually build a house purely with gold rather than using stone or maybe some wood as well for the foundation. Like, there's a lot of issues with this Lurker push as well. Yes, if your opponent gets into this situation, that is fantastic for your opponent and you're probably going to lose. But there were so many things you could have done before to stop your opponent from getting into that situation where you just completely failed. So really what I'm trying to say is that the Lurker or the Hydra is not imbalanced, and you, my friend, just suck. And that's the hard reality. Very hard reality. You did play quite well though, so keep fighting for it. That's going to be it for me today. Thanks all so much for watching. I hope you did enjoy this episode of Is It Imba or Do I Suck? If you did, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and check out all the other Is It Imbas or Do I Suck as well. We have a playlist that Hamster takes care of, and loads of episodes in there. So years of IO this. Also subscribe, almost 100k. Thank you, and bye-bye.